There's not a company out there, there's not a religious church, anything that's not challenged with the different generational communications. Just a snapshot of some of the organizations I've worked with over the last 20 years. Like I said, you can see there is no one industry out there that's having these types of challenges. So I like to go on Google sometimes and just put something random in the search bar to see how much is going on, how many people are out there talking about these things. So as you can see, when you Google managing millennials, 12.2 million people are a little curious about that. Well, guess what? Millennials don't understand baby boomers either. Not as many as 12 million, but getting there. But guess what's coming up next? Gen Z. Gen Z just came out of college and is entering the workforce. That's the highest number right now, 216 million people now, because make no mistake about it, Gen Z are not many millennials. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I know that there's tons of books out there and there's tons of experts out there that talk about millennials. So I took kind of a different approach. I'm not just talking about millennials. Now, if you think this is going to be a session where I'm just going to stand up here and hammer millennials, I got some news for you. It's not going to be that way. The different approach that I have is I want to look at kind of self-awareness first. I believe in order to understand your own generation, you really have to take a deep dive into why you feel the way you do. What were some of the generational signposts or things that happened in your formative years that shaped the way that you think today? So the first step in my book and what I talk about is self-awareness. The second is I like to dispel generational stereotypes. We'll talk about that, but the millennials are the most hammered stereotype generation that we've ever seen. A lot of it has to do with social media, but believe you and me, millennials and Gen Zers also have stereotypes towards older generations like myself. So as we go through this next 45 minutes, I just want you to ask yourself, and anytime you run into any kind of challenge with a younger member of your club, your own family, your office, ask yourself, are they really being difficult or are they just different? Take a deep breath. Because the first thing you're thinking is, oh my God, these millennials, they're all like this. So ask yourself, are they being difficult or are they just being different? So today, normally I do this for a whole day session. I sprinkle in personalities. It's all about communications, effective communications. So we're going to do a 30,000-foot view today, which kind of scratches the surface of what's in my book, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how you can take it to the next journey with the book at the end. So if I do my job today, I'm going to remind you of something you already know, hopefully teach you something new, and if I really hit it out of the ballpark, I'm going to do both. Cool? Awesome. All right, so let's get started. So here's our dilemma. For the first time in modern history, there's 5 active generations in the economy. So the largest generation, and this happened about 2.5 years ago, is the millennials. They're not going to have a long reign of it. As you can see right on their heels is Gen Z. As a matter of fact, at the end of this year, 1 out of every 3 humans on Earth will be part of the Gen Z generation. You know, so just when we think we're starting to figure out millennials, now we're going to have to take a look at the Gen Z. As we get started and we start talking about the different generations, I first want to start by saying this is not a science. I did not go to East Carolina University to study generational sciences. You know, I'm just kind of looking at the observations that I've seen over 25 years and all the research that I've seen and the surveys and all of that, and noticing that it's a big challenge out there. There are always outliers. You all know them. We've all seen the video of the 95-year-old guy in Florida who water skis barefoot down the river, right? I would say he's an outlier. So you may get through this session and say, that's not me. And that's okay. You might be an outlier. You might be a cusper. You guys ever heard that term, cusper? That's what I am. That's what Linda is. I was born in 1965. How many born in 1965 in here? What an awesome year. The Mustang, Diana Ross and the Supremes, Motown. 65 was the year some demographer said, hey, we're done with the baby boomers. We're moving on to the next generation. Well, let's give them a cool name. Okay, let's call them X. So cuspers, it's a bit of a confusing place to be because you typically have 1 foot in one generation and 1 in the other. You will identify yourself more with one generation. Me, personally, is Gen X. but you're always hopping back and forth. The biggest example I would give for us 53-year-olds in the room is the mobile phone, the cell phone. Don't we all remember that day when that thing wasn't around? It didn't bing and zing and wing and light up in the middle of the night. It wasn't there. It just, you know, you left work at 5 o'clock. You didn't think about work until 8 o'clock Monday morning, right? You left it at work. You can't do that anymore. So I have a love-hate relationship with that cell phone. There's not a day that goes by I don't want to throw it in the ocean. Matter of fact, I think I'm all cool on Friday. I pour a glass of wine, I cut off my phone all noble and put it on the bar. I'm not going to look at this thing all weekend. So all weekend I'm sitting there, I'm like, honey, let me see your phone. Honey, let me see your phone. Honey, let me see your phone. Because it's not just a phone, is it, guys? No, I got to check the tides. I got to say, well, there's a cloud. Let's look at the weather. You know, it does everything. So I know the value of that thing, but then again, I know how it really bothers me and it makes me Jones for the old baby boomer days when I wasn't so interrupted all the time. So the positive thing about being a cusper is we tend to be a little bit better at communicating across 2 generations. If you're born kind of smack dab in the middle of a generation, you're very comfortable around yourself, but you might not be as open to someone 10, 15 years older or younger. Cuspers tend to be very good communicators one way or the other. So hire a cusper if you're looking for a good salesperson, good communicator, because no matter if they're, Gen Z millennial or a millennial Gen X or Gen X baby boomer, those born kind of within that 5-year span tend to be a little bit more broader in their communication spectrum. Make sense? So let's start with communication. That is the biggest challenge that every organization has. It starts with communications. And you can't talk about communications these days without talking about attention spans. You remember when you used to, call somebody and say, you got the attention span of a goldfish, and that was a bad thing? Now it's actually a good thing. We now have an average attention span less than that of a goldfish, and it's been proven. Gen Z, the teens, that's down in the 4s already. It's because we're being trained by this rapid, being able to swipe everything around. How many of you guys remember that? That's my phone. I actually had it. When I bought my little beach ranch over there in Ormond Beach, it's 55, built in the 50s. It had this big, ugly Manila jack on the wall. I'm like, what do I do with that? I haven't had a landline in years. So the contractor said, well, this plaster wall is going to take about $800 to patch that hole up. I'm saying, you got to be kidding me. So I went on eBay and found this for $9. Now it is art. So it's so funny when my son comes over with his friend, his friends come over, they're so fascinated. They see it on the wall and they're like looking at it and say, is that real? And they go over there and they start playing with it. You know what the best thing about those old phones were? Really?
Really?
That was our stress release, wasn't it, guys? You could bang the hell out of those phones. They'll never break. They should make cars and airplanes out of those phones. How many of you guys remember the first mobile phone? You think it was that? How many of you had one like that? Remember those things? That's not the first mobile phone, guys. Here's the first mobile phone. You remember your phone was in the kitchen? And when you got that 50-foot cord, man, you had that thing and you're going down the hall, you're going under the bedroom door, you're going down there and you're laying in your bed. That's the first mobile phone. Yeah. So, how long do you think it takes to dial a phone number? Remember, the average attention span of a Gen Zer is like around 4 seconds, right? How long do you think it takes to dial a phone number with an area code, with some 7s, 8s, and 9s in it? What do you think? Shout out a number. How many seconds? 15 seconds. 28 seconds. Wow. So one of my favorite things to do when I speak at Key Club, and I love speaking to the Key Clubbers, they're really open to it, most of them. There'll be a few asleep, believe it or not. My goal when I speak to Key Clubbers is to keep them awake. But they do listen, and they do want to read the book, and they do come up, and some of them, Key Club, you guys would all admit, seem to be a little bit more forward-thinking and trying to understand us, and that's good. But I love to bring a Key Clubber up on stage, and I bring my phone, and I sit them up there, and I say, okay, I want you to dial your best friend's number. What do you think happens? They don't know it. We had to remember things. We had the Rolodex. How many of you guys had the Rolodex? Remember that thing? Remember, I mean, they'd get all ratted and tatted. You'd have that thing for years. They're like, and you have to start stapling business cards to them. They'll never hear this. They'll never have to wait. They'll never have to wait for the brother or the sister to get off the phone so they can make the call. But seriously, I digress. Here we go. What I'm talking about is boomers in the room. If you've got boomers in your club, which we all do, they tend to like a face-to-face. They like a personal phone call. How many of you guys have ever texted a boomer and they call you right back? My dad used to do that. I sent him a quick text with a yes or no answer, and the phone would immediately ring. I'm like, Dad, what do you want? What do you want? I just texted you. I know. What do you want? I texted you, respond. So, 30-minute conversation pursues. But we were the first generation that heard, you've got mail. Remember the AOL mail when it first came out? How many of you guys remember the first time somebody sent you a picture through the internet? You remember that? That big old monitor that weighed about 400 pounds, you're sitting there, so line by line, going like that. When I was flying last week on Southwest, there was this hotshot millennial sitting behind me, raising hell to the stewardess because his internet wasn't working, going 600 miles an hour, 30,000 feet in the air. And I just thought about that first time that picture came through, and how awesome it was. But we do like email. If you got a lot of Gen Xers in your club, you'll notice you'll have that meeting, and they're always like, follow up and say, hey, send me an email on that. What? We just talked about it. I know, send me an email. You know why? Because Gen Xers use email like an electronic file cabinet. If you look at a Gen Xer's email, the whole left side is a folder. If I meet you for more than 5 minutes, you've got a folder. Because we CYA with emails, man. I could pull up an email that somebody sent me 2.5 years ago. Yes, you did. Look, here's what it said. So not a lot of stuff changed here, right, from technology. But a lot's changed since the millennials came around. So I kind of separate them in older and younger millennials. The older millennials, those that are just approaching 40, they are the heaviest users of Facebook. So, I know you guys have all heard that, oh, young people don't use Facebook. That is true for teens. Only 14% of teens admit to actually using Facebook. They're on it because they're watching what you guys are doing. They want to know what mom and dad and grandpa are up to, but they're not really actively engaging in Facebook. But your millennials, your 30 to 40, they're all over Facebook. They share everything. Have you guys seen the baby bump pictures? The moms? When I'll never forget, don't get mad, Linda, when she was pregnant, 3rd trimester, she was like, I'm not coming out of the house. Now it's like baby bump, week 2, week 3, week 10. I mean, it just goes on and on. They've got all 52 weeks with the side profile done. They share everything. But if you do have a Facebook page, again, that's not enough. You have to consciously post something on there every single week. Every day if you can. Does it have to be something that you actually did that week? No, you could share articles, share something that's interesting to your group, to your club, and just share it. Because what happens is young people will look at a Facebook page, the first thing they look at is the last post, and if the last post was May 1994, before Facebook was ever there, no, they're going to look. They're going to tell, this is not an active group. This is not a group that's got a lot of technology or something I want to join. So just keep that in mind if you're managing your Facebook. They like to text, Facebook Messenger. I got my first Facebook Messenger chime about 1.5 years ago, and my phone made a sound it's never made before. I'm like, what the hell is that? And I looked at it, and now all of a sudden, these younger people are starting to hit me up on Facebook Messenger. But when you talk about the younger millennials and Gen Z, they don't use the phone. I'll call my son, he will not answer. And then I'll text him and he responds immediately. They like to text, they like WhatsApp, they like Snapchat. Yep, you know why they like Snapchat? Because everything disappears, right? Instagram is permanent. And you could tell when a teen is taking a picture on Instagram versus Snapchat. We live, near Daytona Beach. It's spring break capital of the world. And I see it every year, and I love it, and I laugh. There's always 4 girls out there right down there at the waves, and they're doing this. And then they all gather around, and they look. Oh, not good enough. And then they go back, and they just keep going. This goes on for like a half an hour because they're doing an Instagram post. And they all got to agree on that Instagram post before they hit post. But Snapchat's different. They won't even do their hair. They'll just rapid fire stuff out. So they're looking for things that are quick, and what's good about Gen Z is they seem to be taking back the privacy. They're not shit. That's what Snapchat's cool about. It's a little bit more private. They're not willingly sharing as much as the previous generations. In my book, I start each chapter with historical signposts. Historical signposts are those things that happen in the formative years, typically your teens, early college, that tend to shape the way that we think throughout our life. So if you look at the boomers, all the stuff that happened when you boomers in the room were growing up, you guys recognize some of this stuff, right? It was pretty turbulent times. You know, there was assassinations, there was the Vietnam War. You know, the big change from silence to the boomers was the first generation that started questioning the status quo. We will no longer be silent. You know, so they started to protest. They were less formal. They were the first generation to use first names at the office. But you can see there was a lot of stuff that went on during this generation that tend to shape the way that they are. And when you look at the strengths of the baby boomers, and I spent a lot of time on these slides when I talk to key clubbers and to young people and to millennials. Here's the strength of the baby boomers, and those of you in the room may agree. Baby boomers are very dedicated, very loyal. You know, they still had the pension. They would stay at one company their entire life and get the gold watch. Hard-working workaholics. But they're competitive. You know, a lot of the baby boomer managers that have millennials, they get frustrated because they come in late. You know, but what they don't realize is work gets done after 5 o'clock now and before 9. It's not uncommon to see a mom come in a little bit late because they had to drop off their kids at school. Maybe leave a little bit early because they have to take their kids to soccer, come home, feed them, give them a bath, read them a bedtime story, and then hop right back on their cell phones or on their laptops and work slam into the middle of the night. They're getting stuff done, just not necessarily at 9 to 9, you know, between 9 to 5, and not necessarily in that cube in the office. So when you look at my generation, Gen X, hey, the pendulum shifted, didn't it? A little less turbulent times. By the way, we were the original slacker generation, because every generation that comes on is hammered by the generation before. This has been going on for decades. So we had MTV, right? We had Reaganomics, the dot-com boom. The big things that shaped our generation was we were the first generation of divorce. You know, where the baby boomers stopped, you know, challenged the status quo, Gen Xers had to live through the first, you know, dual working income parents. We were the latchkey kids. How many latchkey kids in the room? You remember that? Those were fun times, right? We had 3 hours every day after school to break stuff and figure out how to fix it before mom and dad got home. That made us independent, creative. We ran around in the woods. We didn't want to be inside. And that type of mindset, that independent creativity kind of carried into the workforce. So overall, we had pretty good times growing up. Not a lot of challenging things happening. So when you look at Gen Xers, and that's a solid type of group, we always talk about recruiting millennials. Gen Xers are good people to have in your club, guys. They're hardworking, they're creative. They're the type of member you could give a task to and get the hell out of their way. They don't need a lot of hold or hand holding. You know, you give them a job, they fully understand it, they rock and roll. They're good communicators, they're creative, problem solvers. My sister always says, we get done. So Gen Xers are very independent. We're also the smallest generation. We've been called the forgotten generation because we're sandwiched in between the giant baby boomer generation and the giant millennial generation. So let's get into the fun part. Millennials, their pendulum shifted again. But the thing that's really shaped this generation the most is right there. Millennials are really the first generation to experience the 24/7 news cycle their entire life. If something happened at 9:30 for the boomers, we didn't hear about it till 6:30 when Walter came on, right? Now something happens, it's instant. It's not just the 24/7, you know, the plethora of 24/7 news channels on, it's also social media. And a good example of that happened when the Parkland shooting went down in South Florida. We were in the den, I think we had Fox or one of the channels on, and you know, we were watching it on TV, and we saw that horrifying shot of the kids walking out with their hands out. And my 22-year-old son, or 21 at the time, came out of his room with this stoic look on his face. He's not a real emotional guy. He doesn't show a lot of emotions. But he had this phone in his hand, and he just slowly turned it around. And there was a kid in the school streaming the shooting as it was going on, and you could literally hear the gunshots on his phone. So when you think about this generation, they're not waiting to 6:30 to see what happened at Parkland. In many cases, maybe they weren't there physically, but they were there mentally. So they're seeing stuff happen all the time. That's why, you know, they're very advocates of climate change and environmental things. Because this picture here was the Valdez oil tanker leak. Remember that? Remember the Pelicans with the oil on it? I bet every single person in this room can tell me what they used to get the oil off the Pelicans. Dawn dishwashing liquid. That was like 30-some years ago, and they still use that in their commercials. That was a good one. But see, I can guarantee you, if that picture right there was on page 4 in a black and white newspaper in the 40s, I don't think that it would have that kind of effect, right? So they're seeing everything in real time. They're seeing it in visual, in video, and everything, so it has a big effect on that. But the real thing this generation is really focused on, that's messed them up, I think, the most, is the fact that, first of all, for young millennials, 2008 was a game changer for them. For your young millennials and your Gen Zers, that really had a big effect on them. They saw their families lose their pensions, their jobs, their houses. They may have seen an older sibling come out of college with $40,000 in debt and not be able to find a job for years and years. So because of that, they're kind of shaping up to be the most financially savvy generation we've ever seen. There's a higher percentage of Gen Z, 24 years of age or younger, looking into retirement accounts than there are boomers. Because they don't want to put themselves in the position that they were in or what they saw happen with their parents. We also have the helicopter parents. How many would proudly say that I am a helicopter parent? I'm raising my hand. Helicopter parents is not necessarily a bad thing. We were doing what we thought we should do, right? Because that happened. That's what started helicopter parenting. The day those planes hit that building, or those buildings, that's when moms said, I am not in control. But you know what I am in control of? How I raise my kids, where they go, where are they at all times. So that was kind of the start. And then you start seeing, we also have 24/7 news. So we see all these school shootings and things like that. You cannot blame these parents for being helicopter parents. I get it. But the thing that we kind of did too much, the pendulum shift. Okay, Gen X grows up, our parents were off working. You see all this food that millennials like. If it's got the word free in it, they buy it, right? Have you been into Whole Foods lately? Gluten-free, cage-free, pesticide-free, whatever free. It's all free. You know what kind of free food Generation X had? Parent-free. Anything that didn't require a lot of work. You guys remember those hot dogs that came stuffed with the cheese that you put in the microwave for 1 minute? Already had the cheese in it? If you went 1 minute and 1 second, it was ugly. And speaking of the microwaves, you got who remembers getting the first microwave, right? Yeah, I like that. I remember my mom, and we were fascinated. They'd cook a potato in 5 minutes. Holy cow. But we'd be sitting there watching it cook, and my mom would be like, step away from the microwave. There's radiation. You can't stand there and watch it cook, but you could eat it with the radiation in it. I never understood that. But yeah, we had parent-free. So again, the pendulum shifted way over. So, we just like every parent does. Except for now, back in the days, I'm not raising my kids the way my parents raised me, no sir. But we parented, we kind of let them fall just far enough before they hit the floor. They were reaching for the burnt stove and we slapped their hand away. Not that I'm saying that you need to let your kid touch the burnt stove, but we didn't really let them fail, did we? And failure is the best teacher, right? So what's happening is these young people are getting into the workforce, and they have to have very strong, handrails. They need to be kind of led down the path. You have millennials in your club, millennials that come and volunteer at your programs. You need to pat them on the back. You need to give them solid directions, and you need to let them know at all times how good they're doing. I know you're thinking, oh my God, really? But you do. That's not their fault. That's how they were brought up. Let's talk about stereotypes. Yell them out. What are some of the millennial stereotypes, guys? Entitled. What else? Lazy, narcissistic. Here's the big list of everything. All the way down to industry killers. Industry killers! Really? So I Googled industry killers. 2.23 million things millennials are killing, ... Millennials have killed 2 million things. These are actual articles online with industries and companies blaming millennials for their poor financial performance. I don't know how the heck you guys got through Christmas last year. Did you hear what the Millennials killed last year? They killed Geoffrey the Giraffe. And when I saw the CEO talk about why they were going out of business, nowhere in there did they mention the A word, Amazon. They talked about millennials, and they talked about the reason their sales were down is because millennials are waiting longer to have children. And that is true, but failed to kind of mention some of the other obvious things I think that might be taking down toy stores. But here's the real deal, guys. They're socially conscious. This is the first generation that was required to do community service to get out of high school. Think about that. They may have hemmed and hawed when they did it. I know my son did, but I'm going to tell you what. He's taken it into adulthood. They've taken it into adulthood, and they're volunteering with their children. They want to pass those social conscious values down to their kids. So when you're thinking about volunteer activities for your group, you better start thinking about family volunteer activities. You know, these young families, they work all day, they work all week. When they get home, they don't want to leave their family. So if you've got activities in your signature projects, start thinking about how people can volunteer and contribute as a family. But let's be honest, how many of you guys would not want to have members with those types of characteristics? Because that's the real deal, guys. Yeah, the stereotypes are fun, but if you dig deep in this generation, they're going to be a really good one, and they're going to be fine. So you need to embrace them. So here's a survey when we start talking specifically about how millennials feel about associations and organizations. They did a survey back in 2015, and here was the big word, old school. They see no value, it was too expensive, wasn't a community comprised of their peers, it lacked technology. If there's one thing you learned today from this session, I want you to understand and think about this every time. Millennials want to start things, not join things. Remove the word join from all of your marketing material. Embrace them, ask them what's important to you in this community. They will bring up stuff you've never seen before. So do you speak their language? We talked about meetings. Remove that from your vocabulary. Opportunities and experiences. You laugh, but they see these types of things, and that's what they relate with. Pitching them a dues-based membership. How about asking them for an investment, but be prepared to offer them the ROI? And then when you talk about volunteers, it's better to say invite them to collaborate with fellow community leaders to make a difference. All right, so let's quickly talk about Gen Z and we'll wrap things up. Gen Z is now just entering the workforce. They're coming out of college, and as I said, they're different. So their signposts are kind of still in development, but you can see the pendulum is still kind of staying on the chaotic side. I talked about the recession. That really had a huge impact on Gen Z. I mean, my son, when we go to Outback, he's reading the menu from the right side. I never did that when I was 22. Dad was buying dinner, I ate the steak. But he's looking for the right side where the prices are, and he'll say, Dad, why are we spending $22 on a steak? We can go to Publix and get 4 steaks, cook it on the big green egg. I mean, this is a young person kind of question. They're thinking about money. So you have to think about that when you start talking about what your dues are and what they do. But you can see they had the first African-American president, and they still love him, too. Every time I'm at a Key Club convention, when I show this slide, they're like, woo, Obama! But that was really, and we were like, woo, Reagan, because that was the president that was kind of when we were in our formative years. They saw the current president as a reality TV show host before he was president. They saw some crazy stuff. They saw, this is their biggest fear right now. They do an international stress survey of teens. They've been doing it for 27 years. And the number one thing teens are stressed about, 77% of teens, both low income and affluent teens, say the number one fear they have is being shot in their own school. Think about that. How are you supposed to learn in that environment? AOC, love her or hate her, she's doing what our parents told us to do, right? You don't like what you say? You don't like what you're seeing? Do something about it. She's doing something about it. She's on the left side, but it's not going to be long before there's going to be one on the right. And the political party that can attach themselves and relate to Gen Z first is going to win for the next 50 years. And if they don't do it soon, there's going to be a third party. That's just my opinion. But remember, 1 out of every 3 humans on Earth at the end of the year is going to be Gen Z. They're going to be a force to be reckoned with. But here's the big challenge I see with Gen Z, and I call them generation stress. 50% of all mental health cases are happening before the age of 14. And of those 50%, half of them won't even graduate from high school. This cover of Time magazine was the first week of November 2016. What happened that week? First week of November 2016. It was the election. Hillary or Trump are not on there. They chose that. It's a silent epidemic, guys. And it's something that these younger generations are going to have to do that. But why? I believe 2012 was a major turning point. That was the year that smartphones went mainstream and the average teen had a mobile device. Matter of fact, the average age that a child gets their first cell phone now is down to 6 years old. So we're putting these lethal devices in their hands a little early, in my opinion. But here's what's happening. They're always comparing themselves to their friends on social media. They're comparing their mundane, average lives, which we all have and need to admit, right, to everybody else's highlight reels, because nobody puts anything negative on social media, right? So that's depressing when you see everybody doing things and then you start looking back. Have you guys heard of the 100 Club? That's a real thing. When our generation grew up, popularity in high school was like, who's on the homecoming court, right? The quarterback, the cheerleader. Now popularity is solely based on likes. It's not uncommon to see, mostly girls do this, it's not uncommon to see a girl post something on their Instagram or Snapchat, and they'll keep going back to it every 30 seconds or so. And if they don't rapidly get about 100 likes within about 5 minutes, they'll delete the post. Because that's a symbol of popularity. When people go through their feed and they see a lot of posts under 100, then that person must not be popular. Imagine that pressure. They're on their phone an average of 9 hours a day. They can't escape it, the 24-hour news feeds that I talked about, and they're also sleeping with their phones. And we do it too, right? Admit it. How many of you guys sleep with your phones at least arm length apart, right? Did you know that the phones emit what they call blue light? And the blue light has been proved to reduce melatonin in the brain, which is what we need to sleep. So if you sit there for the last 30 minutes before you go to bed and check your feed, which, I sit there and watch my son. He's on his side. They just do this. You've seen it, right? They just sit there and they just scroll through and they look at stuff. But that blue light, not only are they getting stressed out of what they're seeing on there, but the blue light's also reducing the melatonin, which means they're not sleeping as well. That also causes problems as it relates to mental health issues. There was actually a study done last year that showed that the sound that the likes make on your phone, or like a text message or a trigger that those sounds make, it triggers the same part of the brain, the success part of the brain, is when you win chocolate or when you win money or eat chocolate. And believe me, those social media companies know this. But despite all that, I have never been more excited about a generation. They really are going to be all right. Here's what's happening. 60% of them are already saying they want to start their own business. They're going to be entrepreneurs. You know why that is? Think back to 2008. They already know. I'm not putting myself in that position. I'm not going to be tied down to the man. They're doing internships. They're trying to figure out how I can take control at a much earlier time in their life. They're focused on privacy and safety now. They're taking it back. They're focusing on their finances. They're volunteering. They want to change the world more so than the millennials. Bottom line is, I said before, they're going to be the largest generation very soon. What's really interesting is they're trending to be more like their silent generation grandparents, which I think is kind of cool. They've got more in common with us than we think, guys. So, today your goal is to become an intergenerational engagement maven. How do you do that? First thing you do is you attend the session. Check that off. You're here, thanks for coming. The second thing you could do is, if you haven't already read my book, I encourage you to do that. These types of books can get really dry. Like I said, there's 1,000 books out there on different generations and communications and how to do it. But I can guarantee you that I write my book the way that I speak. So you'll feel like I'm standing right here. So it is a pretty good read. Those of you who have long plane flights on the way back. But that's what the book's all about. Kind of what we went over today was this. But if you're involved in any of these types of industries right here, I really talk about how the younger generations have disrupted those industries. Also, if you know of any organizations out there who may be having challenges internally with their employees, or maybe having a hard time kind of addressing younger generations as it relates to customers, certainly send them my way. That's my website you can check out. Lastly, please follow me on social media. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I post the most on LinkedIn every single day. I'm posting something about the different generations, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. How did I do? Did I remind you of something you already know? Yeah? Let me hear you say, yeah. Yeah. Did I teach you something new? Yeah. Did I do both? Yeah. Thank you. Now go change the world.